Well, welcome to Grounded Theory, a subset of a qualitative design methodology. Just remember there are multiple design steps that you can utilize in your dissertation research. There's ethnographic. Here we're going to be talking about grounded theory. There's phenomenological. And so these subsets become important. And lastly, we we'll cover case study analysis as well as a legitimate way for each of us to think about a topic and then move through the research. Now, depending on the size of your population and really the area in which you would like to think about the contribution that your research will play, a case study might serve you better than a grounded theory methodology or a phenomenological or even ethnography. So work with your mentor and be sure to ask those questions. You would be wise to look at some of your qualitative and quantitative design books, and they will also help you work through the core issue of your research and how you would like to move through your research design. But the best of luck to you, and may God richly bless you as you think through design. Now, I just want to, on the outset, say this, that qualitative design is people-centered. It revolves around you going and interviewing and interacting with people. So if you're an introvert, this might be a step of ministry application for you, and you can grow in it. But if you love being around people, then qualitative design theory or methodology is it's just a wonderful way to utilize your gift mix and to begin working through the research problem statement, what you're wanting to uncover. So, okay, so let's go over some of the key ideas that are important, the key ideas that are important for your particular section here if you're interested in grounded theory. So we're just going to define it, when we should use it, some of the key characteristics that will guard grounded theory, conducting the methodology and procedures that would follow. And then lastly, we'll just cover some of the evaluation phase of how we should think about grounded theory for our research. So what is grounded theory? So let's just define it as the books define it. It is a systematic qualitative procedure. Systematic qualitative procedure. So you're well organized here if you're following a systematic process. You use to generate a theory, and you're trying to explain what that theory is using broad conceptual levels, and you're using a process where as you interact with the particular phenomenon, it needs to be substantive in nature. Okay, so in simple terms, as from the definitions, let's break this down even more. You're going to use the data to develop the theory. So a little bit reverse, going to use the data that you get from your interviews that you conduct, your focus groups that you might utilize within your particular design methodology. So it begins with the notion that data is the most important part of this feature, and that's where you need to start with, and then you build out from there your theory. So when do you use a grounded theory research methodology? Well, number one, grounded theory is really the focus of the process of how you uncover the topic. And you're looking, it's action oriented, it's focused on interaction with that particular group. And again, it's the process unfolding of your research. Now, Glasser and Strauss, if you're interested in more of a historical backdrop, this is more of a sociological phenomenon. So it's built in with sociology. And the attempt there, as they first uncovered this, was to focus on habits and my thoughts. What are my feelings? How do I feel about a certain question that maybe the researcher is asking? And so you're walking through, and again, a step-by-step procedural, systematic way of your research. And at this point, you're staying very close to the data that you're uncovering for the research. Now, how did the theory develop? This particular design set, as I said, in 1967, Glasser and Strauss had a book published on this, and this is where they developed the design methodology. And it was not until the 1990s where we see Strauss and Corbin pick up this form of a prescriptive way of predetermining categories and concerns about reliability and validity. So what happened was a lot of researchers will do is they would go to the literature and find those categories and say, well, that will be the driver of my research. Rather, go to the data first, do the data mining, and let that data stand as the development of those particular theoretical emergent themes. So when you think about your design methodology and qualitative, you're going to need to think, which one do I want to go? Now, ground theory does take some time in terms of getting after the data and working through your instrument, but definitely you may find this as a helpful design theory for your particular methodology or your study, the area in which you're wanting to grow in. And then lastly, in 2000, we have Charmens introducing a constructivism methodology. Just know that constructivism is built within education, largely a subset there of study when you look at educational taxonomies, how people learn, how teachers teach. So it's looking at that from an educational taxonomy point of view, and know that in educational programs, this is how they're working through this particular methodology. Now, there are types of design, and when we talk about the systematic design methodologies, this is how you're going to need to explore it. So I put it in a quadrant format here. So number one, you have open coding, and you're dividing that data into segments, and you're looking at commonalities, you're looking at how categories are shaped and where the themes are originating from. The second part would be axial coding, and again, you would do well to open up one of your methodology books and see which one would best work for your particular design. In here, you're thinking through what gives rise to the actual theory itself and or the themes that are developing from your interviews. You give us the context of meaning for how these expressions are being relayed back to you. The strategies of how people utilize these concepts, how do they put this into their life, how do they manage it in their life, becomes important in terms of axial coding. And then lastly, when you think about consequences of those strategies, so what are you learning from that particular population that, again, rises up that emergent theme and becomes important in terms of your application of that meaning and the strategy. So you're looking at consequences. What are the consequence of negative reaction if one goes one direction or another? Third part of this particular design set is looking at the selective coding, where you're arriving at the theory-based understanding of your research. So again, you're beginning at the data level, and then you're finding interrelationship between the categories established out of the data, categories established for your research, and you begin to do, again, axial coding methodology. Again, this is a statistician way of organizing in a systematic, detailed way of your population and the data that you're receiving from your research questions. And then lastly, when you think about the development of the theory itself, you're explaining the phenomenon through verbal statements. You actually may, in chapter 4, give direct statement, what we call rich data text, back in your narrative form. So you write out in paragraph form whoever your population, whoever the particular person you interviewed with a code, and you give direct statements to what they said. So based on what you recorded, based on the transcription, and then you can then get into triangulation between the different variables that you're assessing. But what you're wanting to do is test the series of hypotheses that exist within this particular methodology. and then explain what that phenomenon is and how you arrived at the question of your research. So again, you're connecting the phenomenon back to the research question, and ultimately the interview questions will help you even get down to the data level itself. Now, let's think through this some more when we talk about open coding and axial coding, because this might be an interest to you as you think about working through chapter 4. And chapter 4 is the data, is now giving the results back to in a narrative form of what did you find out from your observation. So we have all these categories, right? And these categories are driven by the data, and these categories have meaning, and therefore you have to express that meaning back in written form, narrative form. It's going to be in paragraph. You might give direct statements of how that particular population feels about the category, and you state it out. And so you move through what we talk about the core categories, the core phenomena. So again, you have these nodes running through, and these nodes are connected back to a key tree trunk concept. And you're building this out even more, looking at causal conditions, you're looking at strategies, you're looking at consequences. But behind that is the context, who the people group is, who you're working with, and the cultural phenomenon that may even exist within that particular population. So open coding category as what we call as the core phenomenon. And you'll find Cresswell does a good job in explaining this even further if you're interested in purchasing his design methodology book. Now, let's move from open coding to axial coding. We've talked about that, and now we're looking at the emerging design as we think about grounded theory. So it's the most abstract conceptual level when we talk about qualitative design. So we're looking at what visual data that we can ascertain from open coding paradigm, and we put it together. So we're looking at in visual format and also in written format as well. And this is going to force you as a researcher to think through the expressions that you use in chapter 4. So here it is. So there's 4 essential criteria: the fit, the work, the relevance, and the modifiability of the research design here. So let's work through this some more. If it's a constructivism design theory, if we're looking at it from a construction level, then we know that it already has a philosophical point of view. It's both post-positivist position, and as we think of modern researchers. Education, again, as I said in a previous slide, drives it. How people learn, how people feel. So we're looking at feeling, we're looking at emotions. We're looking at the experience of what drives that phenomena. And remember this, oh dear ones, that worldview emerges from this. What I believe to be true, what I value, what I hold to, my reality, my personal upbringing, all becomes part of this particular design methodology. And so, not to mention that you have to explore beliefs and values that are important to that particular population. And so as a field researcher, you have to suspend bias if you're connected anyways to that particular population. And then you're narrating, you're basically explaining in an explanatory way what this particular population believes to be true, what do they hold as most important, and then what are those assumptions, what are those meanings that give rise to the emergent themes that you are noticing in your particular research phase. Now, so what's the key then? The key to grounded theory design, we talk about it. Well, there's memoing. This is a process where the researcher can write down key ideas that that you're gaining from the interviews. There's the process approach. What's your methodology? How are you going to do the control? And you do have the theoretical sampling in place and the constant comparative data analysis that needs to take place as you're harvesting this data from your population. But then ultimately, what is the core category, the core theory that you are arriving at as you work through each of these steps? And then finally, you come to the groups. This is the theory that has emerged out of your RQs and out of your field interaction as you go through your action research phases. Now, we have a process where we think about the flow of any type of grounded theory design. Again, this is coming from Creswell, so this is not mine, but this is me summarizing what Creswell says. So you have a research problem that leads to the central phenomenon, which is the grounded research questions. It addresses a process, methodology that you intend to employ, and it contains the activities, contains the actions by the people, and the interactions by the people as well. And then you put the theory together and you begin to understand what really is developing here from your RQs and of course your human interaction that you've done with this particular group. And you establish categories, you relate those categories to have meaning, and then you explain how this theory is established as a relevant theory for this particular study. Now, there is the approach, what we call the zigzag approach for data collection. Please see this as an important methodology where you begin to see saturation within your population, but you do your first interview, you do your second, and then you do your third. And as you're going through each of the interviews, you're refining the process, you're refining the categories. As you might have some preliminary categories that you've established through data collection, but then as you move through your final interview, you have refined the process even more. And that's where we get to what we call saturation data saturation, where now you can stop and probably bring all the elements together at that point of time. So let's continue to think through this some more. You have constant comparison procedural data analysis, where you're just looking at the raw transcripts. You're looking at the document, the field notes that you've collected along the way. And as you work through your interview, you're beginning to see some of these indicators that begin to come up from your research. And this is why it's important that some of your mentors will explain to you, hey, because you might be tied to that particular population, let's say you're a pastor and you're wanting to interview other pastors, this is why it's helpful to do some what we call journal entries before every interview that you're conducting. It helps to set the information aside. What have you learned from the first interview, and then to the second, and eventually to the third, and you find those indicators along the way and things that maybe you need to adjust as you approach each interview. But again, you're categorizing things. You're arriving at meaning and understanding what are those meaningful units for this particular field research. Now, the core of any category in terms of ethnicity in a particular theory, ethnic minority, student process of community building, this is all important. So we're talking about these as variables. Ethnicity, well, are they Hispanic? Are they Black? Are they white? Are they Asian descent? This becomes important to identifying your population. Well, what are they? Gender, male or female? Or what's their background? Do they have economic differences? Are we talking about middle class, lower class? And then you're adapting all those information. So you need to know what your population is and be able to explain how this fits within your research and how these classifications bring meaning to the interviews as well. We're looking at strategies: withdrawal, passive, low, risk, active. We're looking at the interviewing conditions such as peer interaction, working through the properties all the way down to the phenomenon where there's a sense of belonging, there's a source of importance in terms of community that we're considering. Just remember, variable is important even in qualitative as it is in quantitative design methodology. Now, I want to talk about memoing here at this point in time. Memoing is the active way that the researcher can use to write down key ideas as they're conducting or as you're conducting the field research. So as you go into an interview, you may have a field notes where you have a clipboard and you have your questions, research questions and your interview questions, and you begin to just write down key ideas that the individual is saying. And those become important in part to validate and also do the triangulation. Some of you may need to do what we call member checking, where you take the transcription, the recording and the transcription back to the person you interview and allow them to listen and even read through the transcription and agree that that's what they said and verify with you, yeah, I'm good with that. You may not want to do that. And what happens with taking it back to for member checking, you could lose attrition, meaning that individual says, I don't want to be a participant in the field study. Please exclude my comment here and there. And so those are some of the weakness. So there are other ways of ensuring validity to your research, and we need to explore that with you as we work through each of the research topic that you're exploring. So talk with your mentor, or if you want further details on how to go through member checking and using the memoing as an alternate way for ensuring validity, I'd like to talk with you beyond the video and the time that we have here. But just know that memoing is another strategy to help you work through your ideas, your thoughts, and to broaden the exploration of your particular phenomenon. And eventually that we will get into what we call phenomenology and how these are different from grounded theory to phenomenological research. Now, when we're conducting any type of grounded theory study, you just got to decide. You got to decide this is the best methodology I intend to use to address the research problems, the problem statement. I want to identify the process to arrive at the study. I want to seek approval for access. You need to do this early. So if you're getting done with chapter 3, you still haven't asked maybe that population that, hey, this is what I want to do. Make sure you research early, so in case you need to pivot and change, you can quickly adapt. All of you need to do what we call is conduct theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling is simply a way to make adjustments with your interview questions, also make adjustments to the procedures that you're going to employ in your research. And so you pick a small group of individuals that don't belong to your finality of chapter 4, and you just work through it. Again, making the adjustments, making the pivots as you need. Then once I go ahead, I can conduct the research and I begin doing what I call data coding, and I develop that theory, that concept of coding, and I validate that theory, and I begin to write out what is taking place, and that's chapter 4. Okay, and then chapter 5 is the application. So is there an obvious connection between the categories and the raw data? So this is how I'm going to evaluate what we say is grounded theory. Is there a connection between categories and the raw data? Number 2, is the theory useful as a conceptual explanation for the process of being studied? So can you see it unfold is another way of describing that. Does the theory, number 3, provide a relevant explanation of actual problems in a basic process? Can you see this move from number 2 to number 3? Do you see the problem existing? Can you raise that up in your writing and explain this is in a sense the problem area and how this particular population is arriving at meaning? And then lastly, can the theory be modified based on conditions if they change or not? And if so, you will need to think about further data collection. That means you need to go another step with your research and see if that could potentially change. So if the environment was going to change, how might that coexist with your grounded theory and your design methodology? What might happen if you took that one step further? So that's why when you go back to the zigzag approach of interview 1, you're gonna see those changes, and hopefully by interview 3 you've made some adjustments, but you keep going back to that same individual, finding out, wait, I just arrived at a different meaning based on my interview subset questions that I've developed. And we're almost done here. We would like to think through as we work through design theory of of coming to the end here of why it's important to evaluate any particular theory. Well, number one is theoretical, and we're working through the model developed here, what's generating those concepts, those process, those action. We're looking at the phenomenon ultimately, and we're wanting to know the emergent patterns. And this really is all design methodology. We're wanting to understand all of these emergent themes and putting it into categories and being able to explain those categories in rightful ways. And then lastly, as you think about, does the researcher gather extensive data to develop the detailed theory? Is it saturated? And how might you go about thinking about the theory as evolving and comparing it with other data fields and examining that theory based on whether it supports it or whether you can refute other existing theories that have been developed along the way for your particular study area, and especially the participants that are being interviewed. And then thinking through the writing procedure. You're walking through this, and any of your research books will help you walk you through how you will explain chapter 4. And just offer it to you if you like to walk me through your topic and you like to explore that with me. Call me up, or we can set up a video chat where we can discuss further. But ultimately, your mentor will help you come down and establish that finality of your title, your research questions, and hopefully those research questions can be defined into a problem statement where you are heading down the right road for your research design methodology. But just walk through each of these steps. You have the description of the research question, you have the review of the literature, you have the description of your methodology, so that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is your presentation of your theory. And then lastly is the application section, where the implications can be learned from what you have presented in chapter 4 and really what is presented in chapter 2. Well, that concludes our grounded theory mini lecture. I hope this clarifies to you what you need to do. And if there's still some muddiness about this particular design methodology, feel free to contact me. I'd love to interact with you as I have opportunity to.